Have you ever wondered how to make a powerful piano sound like this one, for example? Stick around and I'll explain you how. Let's start with referencing, or as I like to call it, active listening. Referencing is super powerful in music production. Although it can sometimes be demoralizing, referencing industry level songs lets you come close to the sound you want to achieve. When I want to make a sound, I always think of a track that has a similar one. In this case, I knew that the introduction of Lone Wolf by Zomboy had a strong piano in the beginning, therefore I use this track as a reference. I will not play it because of copyright, but feel free to listen to the track if you don't know what I mean. I made this sound solely for the sake of this tutorial, so I decided to try to copy the chords of Lone Wolf as well. For this I used Wave Candy to try and detect the chord progression. I first set the visual mode to Spectrum and set the scale to 100%. For a full view of the frequency spectrum. I also set the max resolution to 4096 bands and the update time to around 34 milliseconds. Although it is not fully effective, this technique allows you to see the notes since there is a keyboard on the left side of the visualizer. The song is currently playing. This is basically a heat map. And these yellow lines are the notes that are being played, and when you hover over these lines you can actually see the notes in the bottom right corner of the spectrum. And basically I try to detect the piano chords, which usually sit around C4, C5, C3, C6, around this area. This is not very accurate because, as you can imagine, there are several sounds playing at the same time, not only the piano in the song. But here in this section it seems pretty clean, and therefore you can actually hover over these lines and see the chord progression. You also have the option to freeze when you are like playing a certain part and you want to stop it right there because you want to know the chords and you want to analyze it a bit deeper and a bit slower. You can stop it by clicking on this freeze button in here in Wave Candy. Pretty cool. Let's start with the main piano. This is the chord progression. As you can see, not all notes have the velocity at 100%. This way the piano sounds more natural. I used the Grand Piano preset from FL Keys and I set the decay to 100% to have a shorter decay time. I also set the release to 50%, the overdrive to 25% for a bit of distortion, and the velocity to 200, so all the way up for extra attack power. I added an EQ to remove the very low frequencies, and a phase distortion, and also a phaser to give extra life and movement to the sound. I also added what's called a pitch shifted reverb. I created this preset in Patcher to have a send that emits the reverb 1 octave up. I use these envelope controllers to control the bypass and wet knobs in here. In this case these are wet buttons, not knobs. There is a pitch shifter from Waves, 100% wet reverb, and an EQ. I will leave a download gate link of this preset if you want it for yourself in the description. Final EQ to remove unnecessary frequency. As for the second piano, this piano comes from a free sampler called UVI Workstation. The piano library is also free. I will leave the link for the sampler and the library in the description. I use the MD Basic Hall piano and tweak the color knob to -7 to brighten it up. As for the mixing, I added an EQ to remove the very lows, also add a little bit of the highs, and a pitch shifted reverb just like the other one before. For the third piano, I use this one only to emphasize some notes. It is also the MD Basic Hall preset. The only difference is that I did not change any of the default settings. As for the mixing, EQ to remove the very lows and very highs. For the sub bass, here is the progression. The sub bass consists of a saw wave. I only removed its fundamental frequency by going to process and remove fundamental, and added a separate sub bass to have better control over the volume of the bass. As for the processing, there is multiband compression and a low pass filter. I then removed anything above 150 Hz. I also added a limiter to strengthen the sub bass by turning the ceiling down to minus 0.5 dB to prevent any peaks, and the gain up to 8 dB. The first one is this one. I call this a sub transient. It works very well when wanting to emphasize the attack of a sub. The way to create a sub transient is very similar to the way to synthesize a kick, or at least the beginning of a kick synthesis. I just basically assign the second envelope, these are the settings, to the coarse pitch of the sine wave, and set the modulation to unipolar at 50%. And I also created a ramp down in LFO1 and assigned it to the level of the oscillator. As for the effects, there is multiband compression and low pass filtering, but I think the filter is doing nothing. When it comes to processing, there is a peak controller that triggers the first band of the main sub's EQ. So that whenever the sub transient hits, the very low frequencies of the main sub duck down. And I also used the same limiter I showed you before in this one. Additionally, I used a castanet with EQ. And I also used a click from an AU5 sample pack, and I just set this to mono because I think it was a little bit too much to the left, so I just wanted to set this to mono and put it in the middle. As for the group mixing, I removed the very highs and lows and brought up the high mids to give a bit more life to the sound. When it comes to stereo width, I referenced Zomboy's track for stereo width by soloing out each frequency group with this plugin that's on the master. Basically, the way to do this is go over to the reference track and analyze each frequency group. With Patcher, you just grab yourself a frequency splitter, and for each band, you pick yourself a stereo imager. In this case, I used Ozone Imager. And you just solo out each frequency and see more or less visually how it's doing in the spectrum. As you can see, the wides from this song are really wide, so that's what I wanted to achieve as well. So I just went to my sound and I did the same with the highs. I just went to each part, each frequency band, and did it for all of the groups and the lows. Because I put the mids a little bit more mono, and usually that means that there is a little bit of gain reduction, I just turned up the volume of the mid frequencies half of a dB up with Fruity Balance. Finally, I added extra saturation to the mid frequencies with this plugin called SDDR22. This is great for analog saturation. This basically replicates an analog saturator that I don't know the name, but this is pretty cool. This is from Klangham, and I love this plugin for saturation. After that, I also added a hard clipper to glue everything together. Basically, I just turned up the gain to 12 dB, and the output, I reduced it to almost the same opposite volume. Without it, with it. There is a bonus tip that I want to give you as well. It is very normal to have a vocal and a piano playing simultaneously. That can be hard to mix sometimes because these two elements usually occupy the same frequency space. This trick in FL Studio allows you to use the vocals as a multi-band sidechain trigger of the elements you want to sidechain. First, all you want to do is put Patcher on the piano chain, in this case on the group chain of the piano. Select the multi-band sidechain preset from the Patcher, and you just sidechain the vocals to this bus. The way to do this in FL Studio is clicking Shift and then left click on the mouse, and you'll immediately sidechain this bus to the group chain of the piano. And in Patcher, you want to go over to Map, right click on from FL Studio, and then click on Outputs, Audio, and then select the linked bus. In this case, these are called the vocals because this bus is also called vocals. Now all you have to do is turn up the sidechain knob. I turned it up to around 25%, and if frequencies clash in the low end, turn up the low cut knob a little bit as well, but in this case I didn't need to. And here's the result without it first. And with it. As you can see, it helps a lot when wanting to emphasize the vocals a little bit more, because of this the vocals will instantly be more evident in the mix. Of course, that's not everything. You have to have a good mix down, or a decent mix down at least. This is just basically a helper. It won't solve the problem for you unless you have a decent mix down to start with. And I have a small gift for you as well. I will give you this project file for free. You can find the link in the description. All the VSTs I used are free, except this T-Rex clipper and, well, of course, Serum. This is just a warning note in case you want this project file. You can also find the link for all the free VSTs in the description. That's it for the video, guys. I really hope you enjoyed. If so, consider liking, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell. I'll see you at the next one.